But we're going to start with our first presentation by Owellen, and we're really glad you can make it.
And thank you.
I'll let you take it away. I assume you've got that set up with Emily.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and it's an honor to be here. Talk about things that I'm passionate about: electricity and solar and EVs. So a quick back of the envelope calculation shows that once you get an EV into the household, you can expect to bump up your electricity use by approximately 40%. But the cost can go up a lot more. You can get costs up to 60%, assuming that you stay within the exact same rate that you're in. So this calls for some due diligence with regards to how to reduce your cost. And there's definitely options to do that. One option is to add solar, generate your energy, which is great. Solar is a great match for EVs, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that down the line. The other option is you can switch to a more conducive rate. There's non-tiered rates, there's time of use rates, and I'll spend some time talking about that. And best of both worlds, do both. So, when you log onto the PG&E website, you're going to see well over 100 different rate schedules, and that can be quite confusing. Fortunately, there's two core attributes that we just need to know to help us select a good rate: tiered and time of use. And we're going to look at these and go through that with the rates. Tiered versus non-tiered. With a tiered rate, the price of electricity depends on the amount of electricity that you use up to the certain point in time. So there's no absolute pricing. At the beginning of the month, your price of electricity could be this, and then halfway through the month it switches to another one and another one. And by the time you're getting to the end of the month, it's something else. For non-tiered rate, the price is the same, regardless of what time, what you've done in the past. Time of use, the price of electricity depends absolutely on the time of the day or the time of the week that you're using the electricity. It's independent of what you've done in the past. It's an absolute value fixed on what time you're using it, usually corresponding to, peak, off-peak, and so forth. Non-time of use plans, it's independent of the time. You could charge at night, at day, or so forth, it doesn't matter. And finally, there's combination rates that have both tiered and time of use. Those are the most complex because there's many different things you're keeping track of. How much electricity you use up to the point in time and what time of day you're using it. When you look at tiered rates, there's typically 5 tiers. There's a first tier, which is usually exactly the same as your baseline. Baseline is a quantity that is allocated to you, and all the other tiers are related to the baseline in some fashion. Tier 2 is the next 30% above your baseline. Tier 3 is the next 70% on top of the 30%. Tier 4 is the next 100%, and so forth. Now, some of the tiered rates, schedules have 5 tiers, some have 4 tiers, some have only 2 tiers. Some of the 5 tiered rates actually fall in effect because the price of the 4th tier is the same as the 5th tier. So we're going to be looking at some of these as we go down the line. What is a baseline? Well, a baseline is a quantity of electricity that's allocated to you on a daily basis. And it doesn't depend on the rate schedule. It's independent of the schedule. It really depends on just 3 factors. Depends on the season. Is it summer? Is it winter? Most of the time, PG&E will allocate you more electricity for the winter because you need it. But in places where there's air conditioning, like in the desert, you'll find that the summer tiers, the summer baseline rates are more. Location as well. If you live closer to the coast where the climate is mild, your baselines are less. If you live somewhere in the mountains where it gets cold, you get more. And finally, heat source. How do you heat your home? If you depend primarily on electricity to heat your home, PG&E awards you a little bit more energy as your baseline. If you have gas, then your baseline is less. Now there's additional factors as well, such as special needs, medical needs, and so forth, but we won't talk much about that. This shows you a map of PG&E allocation of baselines. You can see on the left is various regions. The region all the way on the coast, the T region, is the one that gets least amount. You can see the ones in the desert. The W gets more during the summer for air conditioning. The table on the right is actually three-dimensional. It shows you a geographical region on the first column. The next two pairs of columns are the heating, all electric versus basic quantities, and then the summer and the winter. Why is it important to know your baseline? It's important because the pricing of electricity can vary substantially depending on where you are within the tier. For example, if you look at the E1 rate schedule from 2015, if you get into the higher tiers, you could be paying twice as much for electricity as your starting tier, a factor of 2.06 for the 2015 schedule. For the E6 schedule, off-peak, you could get as much as 2.3 times more expensive than the initial rate. Now, if you look across the whole E6 pricing, from the lowest price to the highest price, you're looking at about 4 times as much if you cut across tiers and time of use. So it's important to know what your tier structure is and what your baseline is and how much energy that you expect to be using. Time of use is another attribute that we need to understand quite well. Time of use is periods that allegedly correspond to demand. The higher the demand, the more expensive the energy. Typically, there's 3 periods. We look at the peak period, usually midday, afternoon. There's a partial peak, which is a transition period, and there's the off-peak, usually at nighttime. Now, the actual number of TOU periods in a schedule can vary. Some schedules have 3 TOUs, a full peak, partial peak, off-peak. Some have only 2. And it could be peak and off-peak, it could be partial peak and off-peak. The other thing that varies quite a bit with TOU, which we need to watch out for, is what time these periods start. Some will start at noon and end at 6 p.m., the peak period. Some will go from 1, some will go from 2, some will go from 3, some will go from 4. And this matters a lot as we begin to look at how these times influence other things, such as your flexibility and your return on investment with solar. First schedule that we'll look at is the E1. This is the default schedule that the PG&E puts everybody on. Most likely this is the schedule that we come from before you make any change. The E1 schedule is a tiered schedule, meaning that the price of electricity depends on how much you've used up until the point in time within your billing cycle. It is non-time of use. So price of electricity is the same. And this has a number of implications for the EV. First of all, a tiered rate schedule is not a good schedule for the EVs. Chances are that just on the normal usage before charging your EV, you've probably gone from tier 1 to 2 to perhaps tier 3. So chances are that all the energy that you feed into your EV is going to come in at the higher tier, which means that you're paying the most for electricity. So once you see a tiered schedule, chances are it's not good for EVs. Time of use is one of those things that can work in our favor, and we'll talk about that down the line because there's quite a lot of flexibility with shifting energy use with the EV. But E1 is not a time of use rate schedule. E7 is an interesting schedule. This was introduced 25 years ago. It's not available right now. It's actually, you have a 3-week window right now for those who are on E7 to actually decide what to move on to. This was introduced about 25 years ago. It's tiered and it's time of use. So it's time of use periods. You've got 2. You've got the peak, it's quite simple, peak and off-peak. The peak period starts at 12 p.m. and ends at 6 p.m. This is excellent for solar. Solar energy produces its maximum at local noon. So if you can get a peak at close to the local noon, that means that you can push, assuming that you're doing net energy metering, you can push in as much energy at a higher price, and that can get you a lot more, it can offset your usage. This plan was closed to new customers in 2008, so you can sign up for it since then, and it's scheduled for retirement in 3 weeks. On March 1, if you don't make any choice, PG&E is going to push you onto a new schedule that's going to be introduced on March 1, which is called the E-TOU schedule. Now note the start of the peak period, 12 noon. As we go down the plans, you'll see what's is happening typically to that start time. E6 is another very popular one. It's tiered and it's time of use similar to the previous one. During the summer, it's got three periods. It's got the peak, it's got the partial peak, it's got the off-peak. In the winter, it's down to just two. There's no peak. There's only partial and off-peak. The peak period starts at 1 p.m., so it's not as good as the previous one for solar, but it's not so bad. You can still push energy in at a high rate. The price differential goes from 15 cents to 51 cents. Now that may look quite expensive, but there's benefits to having a very high price out there, because you can do arbitrage. You can push in at higher prices and pull out at a much lower price. Within 3 weeks, this particular schedule will be closed to new customers. So if you don't sign up for E6 in the next 3 weeks, you will not be able to sign up for it. If you are on E6 already, you will be grandfathered in for another 6 years, so you can remain on it for the next 6 years. E6 at a glance. First thing you notice about E6 is there's a lot of the blue, almost everywhere. The blue is the off-peak season. That means you've got plenty of flexibility for charging your electric vehicle. You can charge all the way up to 10 a.m. You can start again after 9 p.m. and charge almost all the way through the weekend. It's at 5 to 8. Holidays, you can charge pretty much any time that you want. So that's great. Excellent flexibility. But what you don't see within this schedule is that off-peak time can become quite expensive. Remember that E6 is tiered as well. So if you go above the, if you hit tier 4, tier 5 and E6, it can become quite expensive. So that's great. The other thing that you notice on this chart is the difference in price between the lowest tier, the lowest period, which is off-peak, and the highest, the peak period. It's about a factor of 2 to 1, 18 cents to 37 cents. Typically for solar, you want that differential to be quite high to increase your arbitrage. A factor of 2 is reasonably good. We could do better, and I'll show you some that are better. And that just helps you leverage the arbitrage. The next schedule we'll look at is E9. This is the first experimental schedule that PG&E introduced specifically for electric vehicles. It's a tiered system, and it's also time of use. It's got 3 periods in summer, 2 in the winter like the previous one, and the start of the peak period is 2 p.m. ending at 9. So this becomes a little bit less ideal for solar. Your solar production max would have, depending on the orientation of your panel, you would have gone past that, but still not so bad. Excellent rate. It starts at 6 cents all the way to 55 cents. That's ideal. Excellent. This closed to customers August 1. It was eliminated March 1 last year, and essentially got replaced by the current EV program that we're looking at. So we've got the schedule EV. This is a popular one, the one that I'm sure we're all aware of. There's options A and B. The only difference is option B is a separately metered version of option A. Similar pricing, not exactly the same. It's non-tiered, which is fantastic for EVs. That's all you can get. Fill up at just 10 cents, 9 to 10 cents. It's time of use, which is great for solar because it allows you to do arbitrage. And look at the pricing below. It ranges from about 10 cents, 11 cents, all the way to 44 cents. That's a factor of 4 in terms of arbitrage. That means if you do time your solar quite well and your consumption quite well, you can generate 4 times as much as your capacity, your theoretical capacity, at least for a given period window. Now the start time is 2 p.m., it ends at 9 p.m., so it's not as ideal as the E6. In fact, this is the main question that comes in the minds of most solars. They say E6 starts at earlier and this one starts at 2 p.m., but consider not just the time it starts, consider the arbitrage factor. We've got a very good arbitrage factor there. So it's fairly decent for solar. take a look at the same EV plan at a glance. The one thing you immediately notice is there's a lot less of the blue area. The blue area is off-peak area. You can charge starting from 11 p.m. and you end at 7 a.m. So it's much less than what you have for E6. So the horizontal axis is to scale. The vertical axis is not to scale. In fact, the first color there is about half the size of the partial peak. And partial peak is about half the size of peak. It goes double and double, which is fantastic for solar. There's this new plan which is being introduced in 3 weeks. Is the E-TOU time of use schedule. It's a new default E-TOU schedule that PG&E is introducing. It's available to all customers, unlike EV and the previous E9, which is only available to battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. It's an attempt by PG&E to simplify this whole rate schedule, which tend to be quite complex. So the TOU periods on both of them, the A, B, and B option, there's only 2, peak and off-peak. And it's the same timing, whether it's summer or whether it's winter. It's also a tiered system. At least the A option there is a tiered system, and there's only 2 tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. In fact, they no longer refer to it as tiers. It's just a standard rate and a credit for baseline, for usage within the baseline. The difference between the two mainly lies in the tiered. You can see that option B, E-TOU option B, is a non-tiered rate schedule, which is fantastic for EVs.
Is option B the one where you need a separate meter?
No, this is the first schedule that option B does not imply a separate meter.
Got it.
So all the other ones, option B means that you have to get separately metered. But for E-TOU option B doesn't mean that. It simply means it's a different plan,
Thank you.
which I call option B. So option B is non-tiered, all you can get. So if you had a choice between the two for EVs, I'd say option B. The time is different. You can see the peak hour for option A is 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., which is getting really, unfortunately, not too good for solar. For option B, it's even worse. It goes from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. So all this is perhaps, I mean, the argument is that the peak demand period is shifting with all the solar and so forth. So but it just makes it a little bit more difficult for solar users. The other thing to keep in mind is that option B is capped at 225,000. So once the first 225,000 people sign up for option B, nobody else can get in. So there's quite a lot of transition in the rates. One of the things that's happening is we're getting to much shorter summers. The 2 new rates I mentioned have a 4-month summer, which is much shorter than the true 6-month summer. The summers start in June to September instead of April to October. Why does this matter? Because there's different pricing in the summer. The times may be the same, the peak times, but usually the summer rates are different from the winter rates. E6 will be moving to the 4-month summers pretty soon. You can also notice that the peak hours, the definition of peak has been changing, starting from 12 from the earliest ones that we had, shifting to 1 p.m., then 2 p.m., then 3 p.m., and now 4 p.m. And that transition is going to continue. Even the E-TOU-A that's starting at 3 p.m. is going to shift to 4 p.m., and the E6 is also in 2020 going to shift to 4 p.m., which is a bit unfortunate for solar arbitrage. But there's worse news for solar, unfortunately. The net energy metering program, where you can sell energy back to the grid, is also being phased out. Well, there is a cap on it, and as of December 2015, it was 75% full. So if you're thinking about solar, now is the time to get onto it, and I'll talk about that a little bit differently.
Once you have it, are you
You'll be grandfathered in.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that on a separate slide too. And there's a number of rates that are retiring. E7 is going to be transitioning by default to E-TOU in just 3 weeks from now. E6 is going to be frozen on March 1, so if you're thinking about E6, now is the time to get on. You can get on within the next 3 weeks. And then even E-TOU that we talked about will be transitioning to look more like E-TOU-B in terms of its hours.
Is there any good solar plan?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about.
Okay.
So, generate your own energy. Solar is a fantastic option for EVs. Generate your own energy, entire energy within the footprint of your home. The picture you see on the right there is a solar that I installed in my house about 3 years ago. I have it's on the southeast facing side. You can see I have about there's 19 solar panels on the southeast facing side, and there's 16, a total of 35 panels. Now I did this because that was just a space I had on my roof, but I found out something quite interesting just from what I did. My southeast facing panels actually pick up the sun as soon as it comes over the horizon and start generating energy, and they're very strong right in the morning. By noon they're beginning to peter out, and by mid-afternoon they're going down. But my southwest facing panels pick up the sun in the mid-morning and become very strong later in the afternoon. So I got 2 curves right in there. And the reason it's important is that as your peak hours, times when you can sell energy, go later and later in the afternoon, it begins to favor southwest facing panels, because the peak production curve on southwest facing panels, or generally west facing panel, comes later in the day as the sun goes to set. The other thing that I got as a surprise with this was that just based on the solar on the house and arbitrage, I could produce, say, net positive for most of the year, even with 2 full service electric vehicles and 100% electric vehicles in the home, which is interesting. Now, every solar installation, well, not every, but most solar installations, at some point, you're going to be generating excess energy, whether it's long-term excess or short-term excess just during the day. The question arises, what do you do with your excess? And there's 2 options. You can store your excess, and there's several options coming out for that. Battery storage. Tesla introduced its new storage. The advantages are that you're self-sufficient. You can potentially be self-sufficient with your storage. You can go off the grid. You can be immune to power failures. That's what some of the advantages. Disadvantage is costly. You're going to invest quite a bit in batteries for the storage. There's also a limit in the amount of energy. You can only use the energy that you have, and if you don't generate enough, then you still have to tie into the grid. You also don't get the arbitrage effect. You only pull out as much as you put in. You're limited to the size of your solar install. The other option is to sell, which is to sell it back to the grid. So right now we're fortunate that by the mandate of California is that PG&E has to buy your energy from you, which is great for the NEM program. Sell has another advantage. You can do arbitraging. You can pump in energy. You can sell at a much higher rate than you pull out. The effect of doing that is the same as putting a much larger solar panel on your roof. So I have 8.75 kilowatts of panels in there, but the fact that I can sell at 4 times the rate in which I'm buying makes it much larger. It's almost like a 13 or 14 kilowatt install in terms of monthly net effect. Disadvantage is that you're still dependent on the grid. When the power goes down on the grid, you shut down, regardless of the fact that you can generate, because you're tied into the grid, and usually you're tied in with an inverter that's grid away. And then you're subject to all these changing policies. Things are transitioning, and it's becoming less favorable. The atmosphere is becoming less favorable for selling, and at some point it's going to stop completely. Now, I talked about net energy metering. It's a program where you can sell your energy into the grid. NEM, the schedule NEM, is a schedule that sits on top of what's called your otherwise applicable schedule, which is whatever schedule you're on. NEM can sit on top of E1, it can sit on top of E6, it can sit on top of EV or E-TOU. You sell anytime your meter runs backward, which is fun to watch during the day. As I mentioned, NEM has a cap in terms of an enrollment cap. As of December, it was about 76% filled in. The good thing is that if you get into the program before it's closed out, you'll be grandfathered in for 21 years, which is more than enough time to get your return on investment. Now, many people come to solar after going to EV. I came the other way. I got to EVs, and then let's put it differently. I got my solar first of all before I got my EVs. My return on investment on solar when I got it was like 6 years, but by the time I put the EVs in, it had come down to like 4 years, and perhaps even less, just based on some of the arrangements. So 21 years is a long time. Now, one thing to be aware of with net energy metering, you do get credits whenever you push energy inside, but it's not the same as cash. There's difference. Credits are real. It's actually dollar. It offsets dollar for dollar your cost. But credits disappear at the end of the year. You're true up. So it doesn't matter how much credits you accumulate. At the end of the year, they disappear. So it's use them or lose them. Yes.
Is it correct that there is no way whatsoever that you will ever see a check from PG&E going your way?
No, it's not correct. It's not correct. You can see a check. PG&E can write you a check. Now, the only way you can get a check from PG&E is if you supply a net surplus of energy, not credits. Remember, you can rack up credits even when you're energy deficient, just based on arbitrage.
So we're not talking kilowatts?
It's kilowatts, net kilowatt transfer over. Yes.
Okay.
Net energy that goes across the meter. So, how do I put it?
Have you heard of anyone?
Oh yeah. It is coming.
It says PG&E on it?
Yes, it is coming. It is coming. It is coming, but it's
But there's a small little detail,
yes.
which is the check that they write for you is at the wholesale cost of electricity,
Exactly.
not the cost that you have.
So that's 4
Precisely.
cents or 2 cents?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So yeah,
You can
absolutely
frame
right.
that and
Yeah.
Have you met the person?
Yeah. It does happen. It does happen. When they do, refunds are for real excess energy sold. And this is, I think PG&E was pretty clever to do this. Because if they didn't do that, well, if they hadn't done that, just imagine what would happen if some of these EVs can now push energy back into the system, and you don't even need solar. You just go get batteries and, draw energy at night and pump it in during the day and get a check from PG&E. So they don't allow that. That's why they don't do that. In fact, getting a battery system can actually disqualify you from the program for that very reason.
Interesting.
Yeah. But indeed, you can get a check from PG&E, but it's only for 4 cents. Credit disappears. Now, I will say this. If you're getting paid by PG&E, you're actually wasting a lot of money and potential. There's a lot more that you can do with that. The 4 cents that you're getting paid can be 10 times that amount. You could use that value for something else. So I wouldn't recommend getting to that point. Even to leave credits at the end of the 12 months is a waste, in my opinion.
So you're saying that you maybe put too many solar panels on your roof when you get to that point?
Say that one more time.
You're saying then if you got to that point of selling that back to PG&E, you probably had too many solar panels on your roof.
Yes, if at the end of 12 months, now things happen over the year. In winter, the production falls down, sometimes down to like 25% of what you generate in summer. So you're gonna coast with your excess credit from summer. It will help you through the winter. But if at the end of 12 months you're still giving up some credit, then what you'd really like to do, ideal, is end up with zero balance. You either have to pay nor get any. Now, if you have to give up $45 of credit, that's not a big deal. But if you're giving up $1,000 of credit, then you really do need to look at your system.
But I think the real value, as you already said, is what you want to do is generate solar when the rates are high.
Yeah.
And you get paid 51 cents for electricity, and then use it when it's low.
Exactly.
And so net metering handles that switch with tiered pricing.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden tiered pricing is your friend rather than your enemy in all the conversations. So it's really a game which allows you to cost justify that solar in fewer years.
Exactly.
That's the leverage it's had for 10 years now.
So to piggyback on what you're saying here, what rate? What's the best rate to put on top of NEM, assuming that you have solar and you're going to put net energy metering? What's the best rate?
E6.
Well, E6. Oh, that's an interesting option.
No longer get.
E7. Well, we'll talk about all those rates. Now, remember that these two things I'm looking at here are solar net energy metering, and battery-powered or plug-in hybrid electric. I'm looking at all those. And as we talked about in the beginning, the EV is a major consumer of energy. The first thing to consider is arbitrage factor in hours. What is arbitrage factor? It's a price differential between how much you can sell energy and how much you use it. Big ones. We've seen arbitrage factors as much as 4 with EV plan, EVA, EVB plan. We've seen some as low as 1.45 with the E1 with 2. It's about 2 with your E6 plan. Then you consider the hours as well. It doesn't make much sense to have a high arbitrage factor when the hours are such that your solar is past its production and is already shutting down, and then the peak kicks in. It's not valuable. You also have to consider the size of your PV array and the net energy that you're generating and the total energy that you're consuming and the relationship between the two. Absolute numbers don't matter, it's the relationship between the two, as we're going to see. First option, add an E1 to it. Well, E1 is tiered, it's not good for EVs, there's no need to go that way. It's also non-TOU, and that means there's really no value in generating and selling at any point in time. You don't really have that leverage factor. So it's a worst option in my opinion for doing that. Now if you don't do anything, you've just got solar and signed up for NEM, chances are that you'll be on E1. So if you are, definitely shift out of that. E6, as somebody voted here. E6 is tiered, which means it's not ideal for EVs. It may not be obvious from the first diagram that I showed you, but as soon as you get into the high prices once you get into tier 3, tier 4 E6, then it begins to negate some of the gains that you get from the better hours. It's got a great hour. It starts at 1 p.m., which means your solar is still, especially if you have southwest facing panels, you're pushing energy in and you're selling most of your energy at the best price, which is great. It's got an arbitrage factor of about 2.32, which is fairly decent. So it's got potential for being best for solar as it looks, but it could potentially be quite expensive for EVs. How about the EV plan, the EVA plan? Well, EVA plan is non-tiered. Drink as much as you want, which is fantastic for EVs. Its time of use starts at, its peak hour starts at 2 p.m. Well, not as good as the E6, but not too bad. You're still pushing energy at a good rate. It's great because you've got these low off-peak rates. I would say it's definitely, right now, in my opinion, one of the best options for EVs. Not as much for solar, but again, we'll see the combination of the three as we do an analysis. Now, the last option I'll look at over here, before doing a comparison, is the TOU plan. There's 2 of them, the EVA, which is tiered, which is not ideal for EVs, you can get quite expensive. The non-tiered rate is the EVB option. It's good for EVs, but it's not so good. Neither of them are really good for solar. To start at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m., by then your solar is shutting down. The arbitrage factor is also not so nice. It's just a 1.45 price differential in there. So I personally wouldn't consider this for my solar option. There's better options. The 2 options I'll consider are E6 or EVA. What's the best option in there? Now, the answer to that depends on your situation. It depends on the relative size. If you look inside both of them, the sell price, which is a high price differential for E6, you can sell at up to 49 cents. Depends on where you want to tier. It's a tiered structure. From 32 cents to 49. With EVA, you sell at 42. It's non-tiered. That's a fixed price right there. In terms of consumption, with E6, you can start at a very low rate at 13, but if you start consuming a lot, which is likely going to be the case with an EV, you could start paying as much as 30 cents for electricity. With the EV option, you pay 10 cents for electricity. So the answer really lies in your relative generation versus consumption. And I've come up with a table over here to compare the two. If you're generating a significant amount of energy compared with what you're consuming, I would suggest you go with E6 on top of NEM. You'll be able to find that you maximize, you're better off maximizing maximizing your revenue, since your cost is not so much of a factor. If your cost is a factor, as it likely would be with more and more EV use, chances are you'll do quite well with EVA. It gives you the lowest cost, and it still gets some revenue for your solar. There's a third option, which oftentimes we never think about, and that's a hybrid option, somewhere in the middle. That's a situation where you go with EVB. EVB, as I mentioned, is a separately metered option. If you put your EVs and heavy electricity usage on EVB, you're guaranteed a fixed low cost, assuming that you can do all your consumption at night, which is obviously the case with EVs. And then if you put your house and the rest of your electric consumption on E6 and your solar panels on E6, you're guaranteed that you're getting the best price and the best, you're selling the most, assuming of course your panels are rated well. And this option is available, the hybrid option. There are, however, caveats. With the EVB option, you have to install a separate meter, and that costs quite a bit to do. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, and over the years, over the year when I was installing solar, I came up with a program called the PG&E Toolkit. And it's a program that does all the analysis and all the thinking, and I'll switch over right now and do a quick demo of the program. So once you launch the program, you can see it gives you a number of options. If you have two different electricity meters or things, you'll see all the options up there. You can choose a time schedule. I'm going to choose a schedule of a time period of 1 year. And I'll go to 2013. How does the app work? When you purchase the app and log in, it logs into your PG&E account and downloads all your smart meter data from the very beginning, however many years of data, uploads it to the cloud, and then number crunches on it. And it does a tremendous amount of analysis in there. So I'm going to do a report for 2013. 2013 happened to be the year that I installed solar. So you can see that total amount of energy that I used in that whole year was 5,800 something kilowatt hours. The number of days is there. I can quickly go in and see a chart of the energy and plot it out by month. I was moving along merrily, and somewhere in May I installed my solar to jump things down. And you can see how in June, July, everything just went upside down, inverted. I was generating and selling almost as much energy as I was consuming. And that's when a bell went off in my mind. I'm like, hey, you know, from my rough back of the envelope calculation, I'm going to leave quite a lot on the table. And I got my first electric car, my second electric car, and then I started with NEVs and then went up to around 4 EVs, the 2002 models, and 2 of them, and then eventually to the electric cars that we had right now to normalize it, to get it back. So with the app, you can let's go. You can see right below. You can see all the cost from the different. Let's go back up there. You can see the cost for E1, what it would have been on E1, what it would be on E6, E7, E9, and all of them. And you can actually drill down in detail. But let's go to a little bit more detail. Let's go to the plot, and I'm going to scroll down to the month when I installed solar. The month after June. It's a very interesting month. From the previous month, all my daily usage, it goes into the daily usage with all vertical way up. But you can see on this month, almost every day was way down. Almost every single day was excess. You can actually go in detail and look at all the each individual day. But for the month, I'm going to do the calculation for the month. Now again, it gives me a whole analysis. So on the right-hand side over here, everything in parentheses is a positive, is a net gain. This is my credit. Every single option that I have here, E1 would have given me $51. E6 gave me $106. E7 $124, which I can get onto. These ones are 74 and so forth. So E6 is looking like the best option for me. And this was even before the EVs, before I launched my EVs. There's a few additional calculations. By the way, you can drill into the details. If I wanted to see what my E6 was, I could go right there, and it will give you the full breakdown. You'll break it down by tier and by peak, off-peak, partial peak. shows you each amount of energy that you consume and the price of that energy from there. So you can get as much detail as you want and as fine a resolution as you want. It also goes into a few things from the future. You see the new rates that are coming out, you can see an analysis of them. I wouldn't have done as well in the new rate then. It does power calculations as well for you, so you can see how much you'll get if you were using energy storage for that. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you're looking at these charts is that you have to remember that you can significantly influence the results by changing your usage. At this point, I wasn't doing that. Now, if we were to go back and take a look at a more recent month, so let's go to 1 month and go to, say, July of 2015, which is just last year. Now, July of 2015 is significantly different. You can see that net energy used, I used about net energy consumed, almost 700 kilowatts of energy consumed. What is fascinating is that indeed I consumed a lot more than that, but because I generated, this is just the net. You can see that over here with E1 I would have paid $148. With E6 I would have paid $53. But with EV, which I switched to, by the way, in that transition from E6 off once I started consuming quite a lot, with EV I get a credit of 31, even though I still use a tremendous amount of energy. Now let's go into that EV and see.
I'm going to do a time check because
Okay.
it's again end by 11, but I want time for questions.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to round up right after this. So with EV plan, you can see that the net off-peak energy that I use is well over 1,000. And because there was credit for net partial and peak, I was able to more than offset it and come out ahead of the plan. So in my case, with the amount of consumption that I'm doing, it actually worked out in my favor. So in summary, I would say that if you have a relatively large array, especially one that's southwest, relatively large compared to consumption, you can do well with E6. If your consumption is relatively large with the EVA is a good plan for you. And if you're considering buying solar, now is the time to do that. Thanks. Questions?
I imagine there's quite a few questions or things to share.
Did you have a link to the app on the last slide?
Yes, I do. So let's go back to it.
Can we get these foiled?
I believe so. Yeah. I'll probably have to give it to a point of contact.
Is it a free app?
No, it's not free. It's on the App Store.
It's like $1, $10.
I think it's $7 or something
$7.
like that. I believe
And
so.
how do you get the data from PG&E?
Well,
Don't you
PG&E.
need to sign waivers and isn't that?
No, not at all. Not at all. PG&E introduced a program called the Smart Meter Program, and they transitioned pretty much every customer off of the traditional meter to smart meters. So your smart meter uploads the data to PG&E, and you get hourly data reading.
No,
So
how does your program access my data?
So you have to authorize the program. You have to go there and log in with your PG&E account,
I see.
and then it connects in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yes.
I thought that the state passed a law that PG&E had to buy back the energy,
It
but
does.
there's a cap.
Yes.
So does the law allow a cap? I guess it must. Right?
Yes, it does. It does. So the law, that's exactly what's happening. The law says up until a certain amount of, it's supposed to help solar, but it's up until a certain amount of solar energy, number of kilowatts of solar energy have been deployed. And right now we're at least in December, we're about 76% of that cap. And once that much solar is in the system, then the program would have achieved its goal, and PG&E is pulled back out of NEM.
And do you have an idea of how long, given the rate of solar adoption, like how soon would that cap be hit?
You know, I don't have a good feel for that, but it's accelerating because there's several other, there's a lot more than when it first started. It was just you and I. Now there's massive big companies that are selling under the same cap as well. There's Solar City and all these other companies that will come and put solar panels for free for you.
Right,
Yeah, and all that is under the same cap as well.
it is.
Yeah, so it's definitely accelerating. You know, I won't be surprised in, I don't know, in a short time. I would say, I don't know how much time is left. There's other factors at play as well, like tax rebates. It's not a program. I don't know if it's still. I know there's a timeline on that one as well. Federal tax rebate for the solar. Yes.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So I'm on NEM,
Yes.
and I have E6,
Yeah.
and I have electric cars, and I have solar.
Yes.
So that was very helpful what you did to make me understand I'm actually in the right bracket.
Yes.
Now, I charge, I have to honestly tell you, I just plug in my car in the evening when I come home from work.
Yeah.
When do you want me to plug it in on E6?
E6, you definitely have to make sure it's after 9 whenever you
After
go
9
to.
in the
Yes.
evening. And is that going to change in the future? You told me there are changes ahead.
Yes.
Does that affect that as
Yes,
well?
in 2020, E6 hours will change as well. Now, take a close look at E6 because 9 is just a broad category. It's got different hours on the weekend, and the weekend you have to watch out something different as well. Holidays are something different. Winter is something different as well. Winter doesn't matter so much because the arbitrage factor is not so much. It's like 2 cent difference between the cheapest and the most expensive. So it's very forgiving. But you need to make sure that to get the best out of your E6, you need to make sure that you plug in when the
After
rates are the
9
lowest.
or
Yeah,
depending on
precisely.
the moon cycle and all that.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Your data is inferring that you own your solar system, how that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Indeed, I did mention that. In my case, I felt that was the best way to go. There's several other programs available which change the equation quite a bit. Those programs are the same in the sense that somebody's getting that benefit. So Solar City will put a panel for you and become your utility essentially, and you pay them and they pay PG&E. But if you can afford to put the panel in, I think that's, in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to go. Yes.
Well, another thing to think about, you can put on a little solar. So put on half your electric bill to solar, scrape off all those expensive rates,
Yeah.
and live in the cheap one.
That's right. Yeah,
You know,
push your tiers down.
You know, and it's,
That's
you know,
right.
so when I had solar on my last house, you can size it to 90% of my total load.
Yeah,
But I said, well, what if I do half that?
yeah,
And we ran those numbers for that.
yeah,
And they make it so complicated,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
That is,
And
yeah.
another observation is, you know, companies like Germany give people their full rate back.
Yeah.
People put panels on their barns and everything, because they say, look, if people can generate enough electricity, the government or the utility will avoid building a new power plant,
That is right.
which is a massive expense, years of planning. In this country, we're fighting with each other. You know, PG&E is now tightening the screws. I'm sorry. You know, I'm happy they give us something. I'm happy they have some of these options.
We should use it while it's still available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my last question is,
Yeah.
going between these rate plans,
Yes.
are they all reversible?
It depends. If you go out of one that's closing, you can't get back into it. And then there's a limit too. I think it's twice a year maximum. You can change plans. I believe so. Every 6 months.
Yeah, I've you know, some other friends that have
Yeah.
solar. I moved last year, I don't have solar yet.
Yeah.
And so the suggestion is, well, get into 6,
Yeah.
because it's gonna be,
Exactly.
it's gonna go away.
That's
but then I
right.
can move out of it.
That is
Something
correct.
else is better.
That is correct. If you're thinking about 6, or if it's a
Yeah.
possibility, get in. You only have 3 weeks to do it.
Yeah, clock is ticking.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the few who's had the E7 for
Yeah.
7 or 8 years.
Yes.
I just was looking this morning at my bummer letter that they're gonna cut me off on that, and I've gotta decide.
That is
It
right.
sounds like from your presentation, it might be kind of, I've got an electric car and solar, PV solar, my wife.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's maybe kind of a toss-up between E6 and the default E-TOU. But I don't know, maybe we should talk more offline. But
Yes. Well, depending if your EV is a significant amount of energy, you should consider EVA, as an E6. E-TOU I don't think is so friendly, solar friendly. if you are producing a significant amount, I would seriously consider E6. You can always switch out of it. And you can run analysis in real time that will show you what the effect would be of the different rates. Sure.
Question and a comment. The solar, the 33% federal rebate
Yes.
was going to end in 2016. Is that still true?
Well, that's a question. I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I was mentioning earlier. It's been postponed a number of times, and it's certainly something. It was something when I got solar, I was going to end the next year, and I jumped on it, and it's come to 2016. So it's something to consider, and it can make a big difference in the cost of your solar install.
And that's my one comment. When we had solar put in 2.5 years ago, something for you to consider for folks with families. I've got 3 young kids, so I realized I needed to move sooner than later. Number one, to get the rebate, which
Yes.
is a huge deal. And also, I've got 5 members using hot waters, recharging batteries, and dyeing their hair.
Yeah.
But in a couple of years, as the kids trickle out of the house, because of college or whatever, my use is going to go down. So it's this moving target, and so that's I really want to stress. We all have different situations, and just taking that into account, I think your tool really helps look at what's going on to get all this craziness under, just make a decision which one to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it is a fact, there's a reality that these things are going. And when I signed up for solar, there was also another program, a state rebate that gave you, I don't remember how much, maybe a couple thousand. And indeed, I think it was 2 or 3 days after I signed up, the state shut the program down. I never did get that rebate. But I mean, solar, the logistics, the sense of it still makes a lot of sense. But if you can take advantage of these programs, especially net energy metering, I would definitely get on. Because without it, you need a much bigger size panel, and room for arbitrage isn't there, and the return on investment period is much longer. Yes.
Are there different schedules for government agencies, or is it just?
Oh yes. There's plenty. There's schedules for commercials, there's schedules for agriculture, for farms, for especially there's a huge amount of different options, definitely. Okay. Yeah, for 2-phase, 3-phase energy, and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Is PG&E in a conversation, I know that you don't have this involved, but you're in a conversation about that if things become difficult with people with solar, and as battery storage becomes less expensive, are they concerned with people just dropping out of the grid and just relying on their own usage, which some people talk about?
It's a very good question. There's a tremendous amount of debate that's going on within the PG&E system, conflict and debate, and there's different concerns and schools of thought. PG&E's concern, PG&E doesn't get paid directly just based on your bill. There's other factors. The way the CPUC has made it, it's not a direct revenue center, but there's certain incentives. They have incentives to get energy on. But unfortunately, there's other things that are at stake. They feel solar owners should be paying a lot more. Solar owners don't feel the same way. The move is getting to the point where we're almost being forced off the grid in some ways, because from PG&E's perspective, we're using the grid, even though we're supplying energy into the grid, and there's that tension that's going on. If you research it a little bit further, you may actually be able to find meetings where you could go to and attend and cast a vote and pick it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Any burning questions? Okay, Craig?
Yeah.
I'm Grant, sorry.
So I'm jazzed. I want to go out and get solar on my house after this.
Yeah.
Well, how do I do it?
Yeah, you could certainly do it by yourself, but one of the fastest ways to do it is to sign up with an installer. I would recommend to screen. There's a lot of installers, but I recommend to screen for one that would allow you own it, as opposed to rent the system to you. It's so lucrative that most of them would want to rent the system to you, install it for next to nothing, and have you pay them. But what you want, ideally, in my opinion, is a partner who can help you quickly install it and have you own it comfortably. And if that's what you're thinking, yeah.
I think there's several people in this room who might have input for you. Okay, thank you so
Sure,
much.
thank you.
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful
Thank
that you were willing to drive down here and
No,
and
thank
be with
you.
us today.